Well, if you've been with us moving through 1st and 2nd Samuel, it's no news to you. I've said it before that 1st and 2nd Samuel is about your story. It's not directly about you. It's more directly about Christ, but it's for you. Paul reminds Timothy to preach God's word. Why? Because it's profitable. Why? How is it profitable? It's profitable to equip the man of God for every good work. That's the profit of Scripture, to equip you to do work. So as we read Scripture, we first ask, what is this saying about God? Because He's central. How does this connect to Christ? Because He's central. But then the follow-up to that is, if that's true about God and that's true about Christ, then what am I supposed to do about it? And that's exactly how we're supposed to read these kingdom stories, these episodes in the saga of the kingdom under David's rule and reign. We come to the end, and we have here in 2 Samuel 23 his last words that are lasting words because they directly position you to produce good work for Christ. So I hope that as you read this, you'll be encouraged. If you're feeling sluggish, if you're feeling tired, sort of spiritually tired, you've been checking out a little bit, my hope and my prayer is that this will give you a fresh gust of wind in your sails to live vibrantly for Christ, and not to just sort of chug along, but to have energy in the work that you put in for Christ. So let's read this and see how it tells us about our kingdom work today. Let's start with just the first 4 verses where David opens up with the foundation for all of it, the foundation for why we even have a kingdom, why you're even a part of a kingdom, why he's even part of a kingdom, and he lays down the foundation of all of it. If we miss the foundation, if we forget the foundation, we'll just get lost in all the busy work. Now these are the last words of David, not literally the last thing he ever said, but his last thing he's writing down for us. The oracle of David, meaning they're not just his words, the oracle of David, the son of Jesse, the oracle of the man who was raised on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, the sweet psalmist of Israel. He writes, "The Spirit of the Lord speaks by me. His word is on my tongue. The God of Israel has spoken. The rock of Israel has said to me." Or it's a long lead up to what God is actually saying, but he's just trying to communicate. I'm not just randomly writing. The Spirit of the Lord speaks by me. I'm the one that he's anointed to write these things. The person speaking is not just me, it's the God of Israel. He's the faithful rock of Israel. That's what we named the series, because this poem sort of matches Hannah's poem back in the beginning in 1 Samuel, where she referred to God as the rock. This whole thing was about God's fortitude and faithfulness to establish this kingdom. And here's what he says. Here's what God said to David to tell us. When one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of God, he dawns on them like the morning light, like the light or like the sun shining forth on a cloudless morning, like rain that makes grass to sprout from the earth. So David's saying, as king, he has shined God's goodness and favor onto the people he leads. So the kingdom is not just about David, it's about David's effect on everybody else, right? So David's last words are not about how God did so many things for him. David's last words are about how God raised him up to have an effect on everybody else in the kingdom. That's the opening. As king, God has shined goodness on the people and favor onto the people through David. He's saying that he has ruled justly. He has ruled in the fear of God, because God said that when he does, he would be like sunlight to people in darkness. He would be like rain to nourish people that are parched. That David's rule under the fear of God would cause people to be nourished. It's not about grass. He's not trying to talk about grass, you know. It's not an agricultural statement. It's a metaphor for people that are in the kingdom. So the point of David's reign is not just to honor David despite all odds, but it's to nourish and raise up a people who are active for God. Does David deserve that honor? No. It's only possible because of the covenant that God secured with David. Look at verse 5. For does not my house stand so with God? For he has made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and secure. For will he not cause to prosper all my help and my desire? So notice the cause of David's prosperity and success is that God has made an everlasting covenant, and God is the one that keeps it in order. He's the one that orders it. He's the one that secures it. Therefore, God will cause it to prosper. As you read through 1st and 2nd Samuel, you see the mess and the messes that happen. And some of them are David's fault, right? And some of those are big messes that David makes. How in the world can he end by going, God has caused light to shine on people through me? Well, because it's not really David doing it. It's God doing it through David. That's why. It's about the covenant that God secures. It's about the covenant that God orders, that God protects. And it's because of that that God actually is the one that causes David to be helped. And the word help there is not like, when you help somebody do a chore in the house. It's the word for rescue or deliver. He means saved. All those times he's hiding in the cave and running from Saul and fighting the Philistines, and he keeps making it out alive. The time the giant almost killed him because he's too weary to go into battle, and then he's helped out by one of his mighty men. Those times are actually God rescuing him and saving him, securing the covenant, because he promised that he would do that for David and build his kingdom under him. So, David is pointing out the fact that God is the one that causes this kingdom thing to prosper, not me, not anybody else. God is the one that delivers. God is the one that saves. And then David refers to these people that tried to usurp the kingdom, like his son Absalom, like Saul. They wanted the kingdom, right? And all his opponents that face him, even people outside of the kingdom, like Philistines, right? Now he's talking about those people, and he calls them worthless. He refers to these opponents as worthless. Verse 6, but worthless men are like thorns that are thrown away, for they cannot be taken with the hand. But the man who touches them arms himself with iron and the shaft of a spear, and they are utterly consumed with fire. That's a weird picture, but if you think about it, you don't want to touch thorns because they're going to stab your hands. You're going to use armor. You might use a really thick pair of leather gloves to grab it. He's imagining someone using armor and the shaft of a spear to get those thorns out, and they're good for nothing but to be thrown into the fire. So once again, you see that the word worthless is not just like a light diss. When the Old Testament uses the word worthless to describe somebody, it's hard to beat that in terms of just how bad a view Scripture has of the person. And these are people who oppose the kingdom. They don't want to be a part of the kingdom. They don't want to help the kingdom. They don't want to protect David. They want to kill David. And those are to be consumed with fire. Such is the end for those who defy the Lord God and his appointed king. That's his point. So this is all still introduction, all right? It's the lead up to the rest of this chapter. David was granted victory from the Lord against all his opponents, even against all odds. Why? Not because he has such mighty people working for him, and not because David has such skill and so much might. He wants to be really clear. The success of the kingdom is due to God's help, God's strength. He's like, you get it? The rock. He's emphasizing that he's the one that causes light to shine upon the people. He's the one that, through the king, yes, but he's the one feeding and nourishing the grass, so to speak. God secures the covenant. God causes the success, not man. But God uses people to make that happen. He doesn't use worthless people. Those people they're not fruit or vegetables. They're the thorns you throw out. If you're looking at a garden, they're the weeds that are good for nothing. They're worth less. They're not worth anything. But there are people who are worth something. There are people who are a part of the kingdom that as they're nourished and as they grow, they are to be commended. David was valiant, but he didn't do it alone. God helped him. God is the one that delivered him. But part of how he delivered David was empowering others around David, underneath David, who would also demonstrate just how amazing God's covenant protection is. You can ask someone who's probably never read the Bible if they know who David and Goliath were. And they'll be like, oh yeah, or who's David? Oh, the statue, the Michelangelo, yeah. There's some concept of who David is. If you go, who's Benaniah? I don't know. But David's last words are going to point us to other dudes. It wasn't just me. God did this through me to shine on people who were nourished, and look just how nourished they were. Look at how other people took up the mantle of doing great things for God by faith. So David is going to walk us through a list of examples of heroes of the faith besides himself, not because they're the ones that secured the covenant. He's made it really clear God is the one that secures the covenant, but God does it through people. People are involved. People are the means. So in order to just try to make this clear, I want to remind you that we've seen this over and over again, how 1 and 2 Samuel positioned David as a Christ figure. We've talked about this, right? So I don't have to do a 20-minute. David is a prefiguring of the ultimate David, the greater David, Jesus. We've covered this many times, so I'm not going to go into great detail now. But it's not just like a Jesus, just insert Jesus here trick. There's so much evidence, and it's very clear. No one really debates it. David is this Jesus figure, because David isn't eternal. David isn't ultimately the one that sits on the Davidic throne. It's Jesus who does it. Jesus is king. And if we follow Jesus now, we're his kingdom subjects. That means we're really a part of the same kingdom, under the same scepter, same throne, same crown, meaning these are your ancestors. These are your faith ancestors. And as you read the annals of this kingdom story, you're called to live into the greatness of those who've gone before you. Not because they secure the covenant. I'm going to keep saying that over and over again because I think that's why David starts with this. But because God secures the covenant and expands his kingdom using people. Not so that the people get the credit, but that's how he does it. He uses people to work the kingdom success. So I'm going to give you, we've talked about, some of us have talked about, like we need some new growth group questions. I get it. Here's a new one, okay? All right, write it down. In what ways does this passage, this prayer, just this part that we've read up to this point, connect with John 17, Jesus' high priestly prayer in John 17? I'm going to save time and not do it here. Homework for the growth groups. But I'm going to tease it a little bit with John 14, because the point that I'm trying to make is David saw kingdom success, and he's pointing out the fact that he didn't do it by himself. He does it with people under him that he empowers, that he's over, that he's in charge of. They're not equal to him. They're not the same as him. They're not even going to be remembered like he's going to be remembered, but they're still important. It doesn't mean they're unimportant. They're still important. They're under him. And that's just as true with disciples under our King Jesus. I want to remind you in John 14, I gave your homework is John 17, but I'm going to point out John 14, not on the screen, but just listen. You'll remember that Jesus said this, but it's kind of shocking. He's talking to his disciples, and he says to the disciples in John 14, this is 12 to 14, "Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me," so disciples, right? Kingdom subjects, "whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these will he do, because I'm going to the Father." In other words, I'm going to the Father. You're going to be empowered by the Holy Spirit to do greater things than even I did. What? "Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it." Boy, that's powerful. Now, of course, in our minds, we immediately go to the mind-blowing things that Jesus did. And we're going to do things better than, greater things than Jesus did. Our minds immediately go to him walking on sea waves, calming a tempest on the sea. He reversed lifelong paralysis. Like, I haven't done that yet. Are we supposed to do greater things than that? Well, I don't want to turn this into a John 14 sermon, so I'm just going to try to make this quick. But I think it's important that he says works. He doesn't say miracles. There's a word for miracles. There's a word for signs. And he doesn't quite say that. He says works, the things that you do for the kingdom. I think our minds immediately go to the sort of supernaturally fantastic things that Jesus did, and not so much about what he did prior to healing the paralytic that was dropped down to him in the roof, when he did the greater thing by forgiving his sins. Only God can do that. It's not that healing paralysis wasn't great, but which one's greater? So I think we get stuck on the miracle. Am I going to walk on water? I don't think he was saying, everyone, I'm going to go so all of y'all can walk on water. We're going to have like the X-Men, churches full of mutant power people. No. What is the real power of Christianity? Things like forgiveness, things like self-sacrificial love. And it's because he's talking about the things that we do for the kingdom. I think we have a multitude of examples in all of Christian history through Christian martyrs who give up their lives to the death. They proclaim the gospel. All the Christian missionary efforts that we now see in churches in the unlikeliest of places. I prayed earlier, can the gospel pierce the darkness that is over a place like Afghanistan? Humanly speaking, no. No way. They're not just sort of indifferent to the gospel. They'll kill you. But can we sit here and pray it? Yeah. Will missionaries go and do it? They are. That's amazing. Walk on water? This is silly. Jesus' point was never to produce a magic show. He wanted to demonstrate that he should be listened to, and then when you listen to him, he's not trying to confer powers of rabbit out of a hat. He's trying to confer powers of gospel conversion. So we see conversions in droves over time. Against all odds, the church grows. The church grows not just despite persecution, but oftentimes grows under persecution. And so we have so much respect that we owe to people who have to meet in churches underground. We can quibble about a comfortable time to meet and whether we have enough classroom spaces for this or that. These are real things. I talk about them all the time. I think about this weekly. But we don't have to meet in a snow-laden forest in the middle of Russia somewhere. Christians are doing this all the time. We see conversions in the unlikeliest of places. We see wealthy people become humble. We see murderous people become peaceful. We see marriages saved. All these things against all odds. They don't make any human sense. They only make gospel sense. So as we read this chapter, and David starts pointing to these mighty warriors under him, going, look, it wasn't just me. God is the security of the covenant, and he raised me up, but as he raised me up under me, like light shining on grass that's growing, let me point out some of these blades of grass. Let me point out how some of these people got to work for the kingdom, even if you'll never remember their name. I'm going to give you their names now and give you some examples of some of the things that they did. He's not going to give us everything. He's going to give us some of it. I'm still kind of in the lead into it. There's another important piece. This will be good for growth groups too, okay? If you write this down and unpack this more, because I don't have time. But we're reading this passage today kind of in the middle of a sandwich. You've heard me talk before about how sometimes the Bible puts things in a certain order, and it's like making a sandwich with the themes. So like imagine 2 pieces of bread, and then maybe 2 layers of lettuce, and then meat in the middle, something like that. Well, that's kind of what you have here. So I'm going to move through this kind of quickly. If those of you in growth groups, maybe somebody can write it down and you can reflect on it. I can email it later. But I think it's helpful. Because I think as you see me walk this out, okay, bread, lettuce, meat, lettuce, bread, what is the author doing here? Chapter 21 is about David's sin. First layer of bread. Let's go to the next layer of the sandwich. David's champions. We already talked about them. That was in chapter 21. Remember? They fought giants. We did a whole thing on giants and then their names and all those. We got into textual criticism. That was an interesting sermon, right? David's sin, chapter 21. David's champions, the end of chapter 21. Then David's long poem. Thank you, Ben, for covering that, because that's a long poem. Now David's short poem. Then David's longer list of champions that we're about to get into. And then next week, David sins again. It's kind of depressing. That's a depressing note to end on in the book. So in your growth groups, talk about what's the point of the sandwich? You've got David's sin, David's champions, long poem, short poem, David's champions, David's sin. See? One aspect of that, there's a lot to unpack there, but one aspect of that is that his poems emphasize the greatness of God and the success that God grants the covenant kingdom. And right around that meat in the middle is 2 sections on the people that made it happen. The people that got to work. They're not the cause of it. God's the cause of it. That's the meat in the middle. But bracketed on the other side of that is they defeated giants, and then they did all this other crazy stuff that we're about to get into. It's important. He's putting it in the middle. And then on the outside is his sin, right? And we'll cover that next week, why that's sort of the bread of the sandwich. But the point I'm just trying to make is this list of champions is important. You're not just going through names that are hard to pronounce and just banging through it so you can close the book, check off that you finished 2 Samuel. He's wanting you to slow down and reflect on more than just David, but the people that are under David, because that's us. So, here's the point. God secures his kingdom with his anointed king who is served by great champions of faith. God secures the kingdom, nobody else. God is the one that secures the kingdom, and he does it through his anointed king, ultimately Jesus. But that king empowers and is served by champions of the faith. And that's still true today. That's how God's kingdom works. It's even truer today under King Jesus as we live out his kingdom, as we expand it, build it, work it. So this list of champions is meant to inspire us. Nobody can be David, really. We can't be king. We can only be subjects to our one true king, Jesus Christ. But as subjects, we're his fighters. We're supposed to be champions for Christ by faith. So as you read about these men, you're not supposed to think, wow, these dudes must have had incredible skill. I think they had incredible skill, but the point is not their skill got it done. Some of these stories, as you read them, which I promise we're just about to do it, I just don't, we're not supposed to go, man, those guys were really, really talented. We're supposed to go, that's impossible. That doesn't make sense. Unless God did it. That's the only way it can happen. And I think that's how we're supposed to see ourselves. We're not supposed to go out there and do the things that are doable. We're supposed to go out there and do things that people next to us will go, there's no way Lucas would do that unless the God he keeps talking about is real. That's the testimony. All right, let's read it. Let's read it as promised. Let's just read through all the way to the end of the chapter. Take note of the greatness of their feats. Okay, the greatness of what these guys are doing. Some of them are real short, some of them get into some detail. Verse 8, these are the names of the mighty men whom David had. Josheb-Basshebeth, a Tekemonite. He was chief of the 3. I thought you just said 30. Okay, out of the 30, there's these 3 top dogs. And of those 3 top dogs, one guy was in charge of those top 3, and that's this guy. So he's starting with the best of the best of the best. He wielded his spear against 800 whom he killed at one time. Can I just pause there real quick? I don't know if any of you watch old ancient movies, not ancient movies, maybe they're ancient, but movies about ancient times, spears aren't that great. They don't slash. You know, they're not real quick. They're kind of like poke, pull. I don't want to be gross, but I mean, 800 dudes of a not that wieldy of a weapon? Unless y'all know something about spears, I don't know, but that's crazy. This guy gets one verse, and it's the most mind-blowing verse. That's why he's at the top. 800 dudes by himself. There's no assists. And at one time, not 800 accumulated over time, like Legolas and Gimli keeping a record over time. Like one shot, one time, 800. All those Fellowship of the Ring would just bow. Verse 9. And next to him, not physically next to him in that battle, he's saying in the list, next, among the three mighty men that Joshua was in charge of, was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, that's unfortunate, son of Ahohi. He was with David when they defied the Philistines who were gathered there for battle, and the men of Israel withdrew. So Israel is in full retreat. This guy gets up, verse 10. He rose and struck down the Philistines. Sounds like by himself. Everybody was retreating. This guy doesn't retreat. He goes in and he strikes down the Philistines until his hand was weary and his hands clung to the sword. And the Lord brought about a great victory that day, and the men returned after him only to strip the slain. You see that? They weren't like, oh, dude's not retreating, let's back him up. They were like, he's dead. And they left. Then they were like, at some point, they're like, where's son of Dodo at? Where's Dodo Jr.? I don't know. Did he go? He's back. He's still back at the, let's go over there. Maybe they even thought, you know what? We should help him. If he's still out there, we should go help him. They show up and he's done. By himself. They're all dead. The only thing left to do was to get the armor and stuff off the dead soldiers. It's mind-blowing. Verse 11. And next to him was Shammah, the son of Agi the Hararite. The Philistines gathered together at Lehi, where there was a plot of ground full of lentils. So this is a field, this is a crop. Imagine a little plot with the lentil plants. And the men fled from the Philistines. Here you go again. Full retreat. And this one guy's like, I'm not going to lose lentil soup to these Philistine dogs. My wife makes it. I come home from a long day at work, like, I need this lentil soup. All y'all are going to retreat. I'm going to stand in the middle of this lentil field and do it by myself. And that's what he does. Verse 12. But he took his stand in the midst of the plot and defended it and struck down the Philistines, and the Lord worked a great victory. Those current lentils are probably not very usable after that massacre, but he saved the field. Verse 13. And 3 of the 30 chief men went down and came about harvest time to David at the cave of Adullam. Remember when David was hiding out in caves? Here he is. Low on food, low on water. When a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then at Bethlehem. That's where David is from. But it's occupied by Philistines. Now David's hiding out. Verse 15. And David said longingly, oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate. Now, I don't think this is him like, oh, I just wish that somebody, like if right now in the middle of the sermon I was like, oh man, how I wish somebody would just get me a drink of water. I'm so thirsty. Probably one of you would get up and get a drink of water, and then afterwards be like, why don't you just ask? Instead of being passive aggressive about it. I don't know. I don't think he actually wants any, but it's impossible. Bethlehem is occupied by Philistines. He's just reflecting on the time when he could go to his favorite well and get his favorite drink of water from his favorite place. And, he's thirsty. But he's not asking for water in general. He's reflecting on his time in Bethlehem. And he's sort of underneath that, I think, wishing to get out of this cave and the whole thing to be over, not just about water. These 3 guys take it seriously. Then the 3 mighty men, I told you the top 3, the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines. Not giving us details. You're just like, what? How? There is no how. It's God did it. They broke through the camp of the Philistines and drew out water of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate and carried it and brought it to David. Oh man, I wish somebody would give me a drink. They're like, here you go. What? From the well? How'd you get through the lines? It's craziness. Now might be shocking to you what David does. He dumps it out. Wow, that was a waste of time. Why would you dump it out? He poured it out. He would not drink of it, it says. He poured it out. Here's the key phrase, to the Lord. He turned it into an offering. He didn't just dump the drink. He turned it into an offering to the Lord. And he explains, he said, far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Shall I drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives? Therefore, he would not drink it. These things the three mighty men did. In other words, these are the kinds of things they did. I'm just giving you some examples. They did more things. Verse 18. Now Abishai, we've seen him before. Now Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief of the 30. You had the top 3, the guy that's in charge of the top 3. The rest of the 30, this is the guy that's in charge of the rest of the 30, which is Abishai. And he wielded his spear against 300 men and killed them and won a name beside the 3. 300 is amazing. It's not 800, right? It's basically triaging it. He was the most renowned of the 30 and became their commander, but he did not attain to the 3. Verse 20, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds. Let me give you one. Right? He struck down 2 Ariels of Moab. I had to look that up because Ariel to me is a Disney character. I don't know what this is talking about. It's just basically transliterating the Hebrew because nobody knows what it means. It probably is a top fighters of Moab. It's something amazing. It defeated 2 Ariels actually. Now, they're not mermaids. These are like fighters, warriors, maybe garrisons, something like that. So it's just giving us the Hebrew there. He struck down 2 Ariels of Moab. Ancient readers would be like, wow. He also went down and struck down a lion in a pit on a day when snow had fallen. Each part of that is supposed to be like raise the wow factor. He struck down a lion, wow, in a pit. Whoa. When it was snowing, you're like, goodness. Verse 21, and he struck down an Egyptian, a handsome man. Wow, what'd you do that for, Benaiah? I think Scripture tends to equate handsomeness and beauty with traits that are of great physical or otherwise quality. But the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, but Benaiah went down to him with a staff. It's not even a weapon. He goes down to him with a non-weapon and snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. These things did Benaiah the son of Jehoiada and won a name beside the 3 mighty men. He was renowned among the 30, but he did not attain to the 3. And David set him over his bodyguard. Now the list. I'm sure I'll botch these names. It's okay. Encourage you when you read through it out loud to your family. Don't worry about it. Just play a clip of me botching it. Verse 24, Asahel, the brother of Joab, was one of the 30. Elhanan, the son of Dodo of Bethlehem. This is probably a different Elhanan than we saw a couple sermons ago. Shema of Herod, Elika of Herod, Helez the Paltite, Ira, the son of Ikesh of Tekoa, Abiezer of Anathoth, Mebunai, the Hushathite, Zalman, the Ahohite, Maharai of Netophah, Heleb, the son of Bena of Netophah, Ittai, the son of Ribai of Gibeah, of the people of Benjamin, Benaiah of Pirathon, Hiddai of the brooks of Gash, Abi-Alban, the Arbathite, Asmaveth of Bahurim, Eliabah, the Shalbonite, the sons of Jashan, Jonathan, Shammah the Hararite, Ahiam, the son of Shahar the Hararite, Eliphalet, the son of Ahasbai of Maacah, Eliam, the son of Ahithophel the Gilonite, Hezro of Carmel, Parai the Arbite, Egal, the son of Nathan of Zobah, Bani the Gadite, Zelek the Ammonite, Naharai of Beeroth, the armor-bearer of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, Ira the Ithrite, Gareb the Ithrite, Uriah the Hittite. Oh, suddenly we recognize one of their names. 37 in all. So when it says the 30 mighty men, it's not saying 30 exact guys, it's saying 30 to represent this 30 some odd group of people. But it ends with their names because, man, let me just give you a list, examples of the top guys, but it wasn't just the top guys. These guys are still the top 30 out of all of the thousands of soldiers of Israel. These are the top 30. That's a small percentile. These guys are, he's not giving us stories for each and every one of their names, but he's listing their names, not to give you a list of names to choose from, probably not that valuable for you anyway. If you're having kids soon, maybe, I don't know, it'd be cool to have some of these. But it's not for that. It's not for their personal glory. It's for the glory of God and using normal people to do incredible things. That's the point. Now, I want to just in this last section point out to you a couple of things quickly before we wrap up. First, the text in this list of names and amazing feats continues to emphasize that the Lord is the one that did it. I'll take your eyes to a couple spots real quickly. One is verse 10. He struck down the Philistines till his hand was weary, his hand clung to the sword. Just a quick side note, I remember working masonry construction with these big Hilti hammers, and the more I gripped it and the vibration of the hammer all day, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my hands like this. I couldn't open them. I'd have to go like that, okay? It's the vibration of the sword as he's hacking away at these people for that long that causes that to happen. So did God just do it, or was effort put in? No, effort was put in. However, the Lord brought about a great victory that day, not Eleazar. The Lord did it. Look down at verse 12. He took a stand in the midst of the plot. This is the guy defending the lentil field, Shammah. He defended it, struck down the Philistines, and the Lord worked a great victory. So there's just a couple examples of how the text is still emphasizing what David started with. The Rock of Israel, he's the one that gets this done. And no matter what we do that's successful, all glory and credit goes to God. None of us can ever go, I saved my marriage, I did this, I got my kids saved. No, God does these things in kingdom work. But we also can't go, well, if God's going to save my marriage, I'm going to just check out then. If God's going to save my kids, I'm not going to talk to them about the Lord. That's foolish. Grab the sword and get to work. Next thing I want you to notice is not just that the Lord did it through people who got to work, but that this passage emphasizes that as great as they all were, some were greater. And that's okay. You know, Shammah didn't rise to the level of Josheb. And that's all right. That's not shame for Shammah. That's not shame on you, Shammah. You did pretty good. You defended a lentil field, but you didn't kill 800. It's not shaming him. This is all good news. And we're not supposed to think competitively with one another about who's greater. That's what the disciples were getting wrong, right? When Jesus is like, what are you guys talking about? Never mind. Well, who's greater? Who's going to be the greatest one in the kingdom? And then Jesus had to teach them the one who serves is the greatest. The last shall be first. Jesus is very clear that some are given greater talents than others. Some are given 1, some are given 5, some are given 10, right? Even in the parable of the sower, there's this production of the field of those that are by faith. The seed takes root, and some produce this much crop, some produce that much crop, some produce this much crop. Some people have greater faith than other people, and through that faith do greater things than other people. You cannot control your gifting. You are not in charge of your aptitude. God's in charge of that. And we're not supposed to go, why did you give this person so much gifting and I didn't get that much gifting? God just wants you to do what you can do with the gifting that he gave you and not compare yourself to other people. Everyone's not going to be the chief of the 30 or the chief of the 3, right? God's going to gift certain people to do that. But he still wants you to get to work, to your level, to the level that God has given you. With the things that you can't control, your gifting, your intelligence level, your people skills, whatever it is. Use what God has given you. Focus on what God has invested in you, and recognize there are some things that you can control. There are things that you are supposed to be responsible for. Like I said, these guys, they needed God's amazing, miraculous working in them, right? They couldn't do it without David. There's no way this guy would have lasted in that lentil field 1 second if it weren't for God doing it. But he still had to stand in the middle of the field. He still had to grab that weapon. They needed to pick up their weapons. They, I'm sure, practiced. I'm sure they planned. I'm sure they're like, let's go get David this drink. Do you think they were just like, whatever, you go that way and I go this way, whatever? Or do you think they at least drew something in the sand? Like, how about this looks like the weakest part? We'll just punch through there real quick. Before they realize what happened, we'll escape this other way. Don't you think? I mean, the Proverbs talk about the wisdom of planning, and the fool doesn't plan. They practiced, they planned, they fought. But ultimately, what they did was they placed their faith in their covenant God like David did. And that granted them success. Last thing I'll point out is the text shows us not just how David is like Christ, but also tells us how David is not like Christ. And we don't want to miss that. Why? Because that explains this weird episodes where he dumps the water out. They go get him the water. He goes, wait a minute. Did you get this from the well of Bethlehem that I just talked about? Yeah. I can't drink this. What? I have to offer this to the Lord. Far be it from me that I should drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives. Now, these guys, to our knowledge, they weren't even cut, scratched. What blood is he talking about? It's the risk of the blood. You guys are risking your lives so I can have a sip of water from my favorite well? That just doesn't, I'm not worthy of that. I'm not worthy of that kind of service. There's one who is, though. The Lord. He should get the drink. And so he doesn't dump it on the ground. He pours it as an offering to the one who is worthy of the greatest risk of our lives, who is worthy of us pouring ourselves out, even if it means death. There's one who's worthy of that. And here's the mind-blowing thing. The way that he ultimately secures that risk everything effort for the kingdom is not by him going, I'm so holy, I demand that you risk spilling out your own blood in sacrifice for me. Instead, he goes, here's how I'm going to shine light on you. Here's how I'm going to nourish you, you parched grass. How I'm going to turn you into a lush field. I'm going to pour my life out in sacrifice for you. Is that king worthy? That king is worthy. Worthy of every effort, worthy of your diligence, worthy of your time, worthy of staying up late sometimes, planning, thinking, how do we do this? How do we accomplish this? How do we conquer? Jesus secures that worthiness, even though he already is worthy, but he demonstrates his great love for us in the cross to give us not just no excuse, but to empower us and change us into the kind of people who will risk even life to serve this worthy king. God secures his kingdom with his anointed king, and he does it under Jesus, serving Jesus with these great champions of faith, and that's us. Some of you this morning, that plot of ground you need to stand on is your marriage. And maybe there's some things wrong there that need to be fixed. Conquer it. Your marriage is a picture of the gospel. It's not a picture of how much chemistry you have. It's supposed to be a picture of, even against all odds, we're opposites, we think different, whatever it is, we can conquer that to make this a grace-displaying marriage. But the only way we can do that is by faith in God. But once you place your faith and trust that God can rescue marriages, it means get to work. Stand there, and even if it feels like it's an onslaught of Philistines for hours, and no one is in your corner, no one's around you, there's one who's behind you, and that's the one that matters. The one that grants victory for a marriage is Christ himself. But get to work. If you're single, you're not married yet, maybe there's something about yourself you need to conquer first. Are you marriable? How marriable are you? At the end of the day, none of us are marriable, right? So if you take that to an extreme, none of us get married. But there are things you need to work on, things that you've been putting off. Kill it. Kill it already. Not by your own strength and by your own effort. Take it to the Lord and trust that He empowers champions, not little weaklings that cower at the sight of difficult challenges in life. Be a man. Be a woman worthy of the hand of the best Christian you can think of, and strive for that. Parents, don't just look for changes in the kids that you want to see, but make the changes in yourself that they need to see in you. This is very spiritual. This is why we don't talk about physical soldiers and physical fighting. As Paul says in Ephesians 6, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. They're spiritual powers at work that want your marriage to fail, want you to marry the wrong person, want you to mess up your kids' lives, want you to hate your parents. And we don't see them except through eyes of faith. There's no way you can see defending a lentil field in that scenario except if God does it. It's the same with us. We have to see it with eyes of faith or we won't see it at all. But if you see it with eyes of faith, it encourages you to get to work and do the great things that God has called you to do in your marriage, in your parenting, in your friendships, in this church, even how you comport yourself in your career, surrounded maybe by non-Christians on the left and on the right, but not compromising. Being a Daniel in Babylon takes faith. But God supplies us with what we need to trust Him to do it. Let's pray.